Hello, welcome back to the Vintage Model Company. Today we're doing the instructional build video for the new Balsa Baron. This is a brand new plane from the Balsa Basic series that you can build yourself with our new model kit. Before we get started, here are the things that you'll need to build this aeroplane. To make things easier for you, make sure to check out the product page for the Baron to see a complete breakdown of all of the products, materials and tools that you will need for this aircraft project. Now, if you've seen a demo flight of this plane or the development video, you'll know that this aircraft is an extremely sporty but beginner-friendly aircraft and makes for a fantastic second plane or perhaps your first aileron trainer. I definitely recommend going to watch one of those videos before watching this. You can build this aeroplane in as little as a day if you'd like to just chuck it all together, cover it with tape, as I'm going to show you in this video, as a beginner-friendly technique. Or you can go to town and really finish it in a more professional way, shall we say, and spend a good amount of time building this thing and finishing it and sanding it and doing all the TLC to make it your own aeroplane that will last you hopefully a long time. Okay, without further ado, let's check out the first part of the build. Okay, these are all of the pieces of wood that you get in the Baron kit. So let's take a look at all of the different components. So over here we have the main spar, then we have bits to make the main sort of centre section of the fuselage, including the firewall or bulkhead, whatever you want to call it, to bolt your motor to. You've got the outside panels of the fuselage. Here are the ailerons, which are quite big. In fact, they're massive on this plane. And then you've got bits of the tail over here. This is the top of the fuselage. These are your ribs. You might be able to recognise these. They're pretty easily recognisable. The ribs are what give your wing the airfoil profile. And then these are the leading and trailing edges of the wing. And there's some more tail pieces over here. And yeah, this is the horizontal stabilizer or part of it. What I like to do is to cut out all of the pieces at once to save time, and then we can get started on the wing. You can pretty much pop out the pieces like this, where they sort of pop out by hand, but really you should be using a knife if you want to get a good finish, because you might accidentally break the main piece of wood instead of the tabs. Having said that, we do use pretty chunky wood. This is 3mm or 1/8 balsa wood, so yeah, it's difficult to break, as you can see, but yeah, I'd recommend using this just to be on the safe side. Obviously the plywood is a lot harder to cut, but again, you can just use a knife and just do several light passes over these tabs to break them, and then you can pop out the entire component. Okay, I've stacked all of the different components together into little groups over there, but first let's talk about the glue I'm using. This glue is Rocket Max. It's one of the Rocket series glues from Deluxe Materials. You can get this kind of thing on our website, this and the more viscous Rocket Hot, but you can use normal wood glue. Wood glue is perfectly acceptable, but yes, the super glue cyano adhesives are great for speedy build, so that's why I'm going to be using it in this video. The first parts that you need to select are the main wooden spar, the leading and trailing edges, which are these parts here, and this spar doubler, which is a piece of balsa which goes on top of the plywood spar. You'll also need to have to hand your end pieces, or the wing tips for the wings, and the ribs, of course, which go bang 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 along the length of the wing. So what we're going to do first of all is to laminate these two together, which means just sticking them together. The key thing to bear in mind is that you want to get these notches aligned perfectly so that the ribs, when you come to put them on, are not going either way like this. They're going to be dead straight. So we'll take some glue, run a thin bead along the length of the spar like this. And then we can just carefully fit this over the top. You've got about 20 seconds to work with this before it dries with this particular glue. So we can get it sort of aligned like that, and then we can use one of these ribs just to test to see if it is straight or not. And that looks pretty good. Right, this piece here is the leading edge with the curved edges, and this is the trailing edge. So this is how you want to assemble your outer wing frame with the spar in the middle. The plywood piece goes towards the rear, and the balsa on this laminated component goes towards the front. You can simply push the plywood piece into the notch and then have the balsa doubler towards the front. Now we can take our ribs. This rib is the most common in the kit, that goes in most of these slots here. This one has extra little notches cut out of it, and that's because it wants to go in the end so that it notches up with this end piece, the wingtip. So simply put a bit of glue on the rib, like this, and a little bit on the tabs, and in the place where it will connect with the spar, and then you can just slot that in there, like this. And now we just need to do that with the rest of them. Just take your time, make sure that they're all aligned properly, and that the top bit here is nice and flush. Okay, now we have the main bit of the wing done. The only ribs that we haven't installed yet are these over here, and that's because they are slightly different again to the rest of the ribs, and that's because they have this cutout in the top there. The reason for that will become apparent as we stick this in. This is where the smallest piece of the entire kit comes in, and this just slots straight into these two notches on the middle two ribs. This is where the servo will go later on, in case you were wondering. With the wing assembly pretty much done and ready for some sanding and the covering process, we can put that to the side. We also won't be needing these ailerons which attach to that wing until later on, so we can also put that to the side. For now, we're going to start with the second part of the build, which is assembling the main internal parts of the fuselage. This is very intuitive. All you need to do is to stick the sides together like this, and then we're going to have the front go on here like that. Now, as you might imagine, squareness is quite an important thing to have on an aeroplane. So what we're going to do, just because we don't have a square to hand, one of those tools to keep everything nice and square, that is actually a triangle, confusingly, is just make one off the scrap balsa wood that we've got included in the kit. This 90-degree angle is going to help our fuselage parts be nice and square. Okay, so let's just start by putting one side at a time together. One thing to help the fit, to make sure that you get a really nice close fit between these two parts, is to sand down the knobbly bits from the tabs. Doesn't take very long though, which is good. Next you can glue the front on, which is the front firewall. You might notice that this has extra tabs on the sides, and that's to make sure that you're not just relying on the glue on here to keep it attached when you've got your motor spinning around. That's because it fits into this. Doesn't really matter which way round this is in terms of this hole in here. You could have this going the other way with the hole on that side, but yeah, it's just kind of up to you. And with that, you've got your main centre section complete. Now we can get on to the main fuselage sides. You'll see that there's a notch here, which is for this tab to fit into, so we can just align those. So what we can do is put a bit of glue down on the fuselage side, and then align that notch, and make sure that the top of these tabs here are flush with that top edge of the fuselage side, the balsa side to be specific. Once you have the first side on, you can see how the top piece here can align with this. However, I would recommend not putting the top piece on yet until you've got your electronics installed. You can build this plane mostly before installing the electronics, which is nice. So you can buy the wood pack first and then the electronics later if you want to. Okay, so there's most of the fuselage done. We've got the centre core here, we've got the two sides and the firewall or the motor mount, and now we're going to put the motor and the ESC inside before putting the top piece on. This plane uses the B motor, but you can use a more powerful motor if you'd like to. This firewall mount takes a range of different mounting options with the different screw positions here and different bolt positions. As mentioned earlier, there should be a link in the description showing you how to connect all of these electronics together before you start on the build. But yes, let's crack on with posting these little bullet connectors through the hole here in the fuselage former. It can go on there like that. And then we can take these screws and screw the motor to the front firewall. If you'd like to, you can actually just drill out these holes a little bit wider so you can use the bolts included in the power pack kit instead. And that might be a bit more of a long-term solution. But if you want just the ease of attaching these on and you would like to remove it potentially in the future to use on a different plane, then you can attach the motor just using these wood screws. Some people out there definitely don't like using wood screws like this, but for beginners who just want to remove the motor, then this is a really good option. This thing is really solidly locked in here. There's no way I'm going to be breaking that out of there. If anything, the firewall would break first. It's just with maybe different temperatures, different humidities that might loosen the grips of the screws on this wood here. So yeah. Remember, you can put these in any order, you just have to check to see what way the motor is rotating. Now we can post the battery connector through this hole in the bottom plate. It will come out there, and this is where we're going to be putting the battery later on, so you want access to this through here. Of course it won't go on properly if it's the wrong way around, but this big hole here goes towards the front. Make sure to smear a bit of glue in here just to make sure there's a nice extra bit of contact with the firewall. With the top plate on, the whole fuselage becomes a pretty solid unit, and you can really feel how all of these different chunky pieces of wood have added a lot to the strength. Next we're going to assemble some of the tail pieces. So first of all, take these two parts here, put them on the table, and we're just going to put a bit of glue on here. And then use the table as your friend and push the two parts together. Now we're going to do exactly the same process for the elevator parts. Cool, okay, after about 20 seconds the elevator is now done. And now we can take these four parts which make up the vertical stabiliser and put those together. First of all, we're going to take these sort of pizza shaped pieces with the bit of a zigzag in them and glue those together. You don't need too much glue here, but of course we want enough to go around. So that's the main part of the vertical surface done. This piece is the sort of razor for it, I suppose you could say, and that notches just up to this protruding part here, like that. Now there is a rudder piece which isn't controllable on the stock aircraft, but there's no reason why you couldn't make this a controllable surface if you hook this up to a servo. So it's up to you if you want to customise it. But on this plane, it's just going to be a 3-channel plane, not a 4-channel, so we're just going to put some glue on here and then stick it on the end. And now your vertical surface is done. Okay, so now we have all of the major components finished up. We've got all of these different pieces, including the control surfaces and the main parts such as the fuselage and the wing and the tail surfaces. You can now see how the whole thing is going to go together. However, before we get on with the final assembly, we need to first cover the fuselage, cover the wing, and cover all of the extra parts. Before that though, we need to add this final piece to the fuselage. So to align that, what you want to do is to put your horizontal surface and your vertical surface into this slot here. And then you can take your final fuselage piece and just slot it up to the back of there so that these parts are flush. Then you can take these pieces away. I'm just going to use a pencil to mark out where these are, but you could glue that. But you could glue this in place while you have this attached. I just find it easier to do it this way. Now we're going to just stick that on the top. Perfect. Looks spot on. Now what we need to do is to sand these components to make sure that they're ready for covering. Okay, with all of the different parts nicely sanded, we can move on to the covering phase. We're not going to go completely into the step-by-step process of covering in this particular video. This is because we have many dedicated videos on several different covering techniques, including this one, the covering with tape method. All you need to know about this particular airframe and how it might differ to others is that you can cover everything apart from the bottom of the fuselage, of course. Just make sure that on this airframe that you cover everything individually, and on the underside of the wing, make sure to leave the middle section uncovered so that you can later put a lot of glue on these exposed wooden pieces and create a nice bond to the fuselage. This is also the case for the tail piece, or specifically the horizontal stabilizer, where you won't need to completely cover the underside just because there's no point. It's just where we're going to put some glue on later. Right, now we have all of the different parts covered with the covering tape. It's time to put them all together and to add the servos, control linkages and control horns to finish up the aircraft. First of all, let's hinge the ailerons. So you can use mylar hinges to do this, but because we're doing this quickly with the quick method of using tape, I'm just going to make some tape hinges. This really isn't very difficult. All you have to do is take a few strips of tape, stick them to the probably the bottom. There we go. So there we go. I've done that. And then if you want, you can put a bit more tape on the top over the same place on the wing where you put the first hinge. Now you want to bend this back, and this is just to stop the hinge coming apart, which could be a bit catastrophic if that happens when you're flying. So there we go, got one hinge. Now you want to do that for the second aileron and of course the elevator. Okay, now that we have the ailerons and everything attached, we can actually start to assemble the aircraft into its finished form. So first of all, let's take the two vertical and horizontal surfaces. So as you can probably tell, you can just slot them together, add a bit of glue and stick them into the slots in the tail. Now it's quite key to get this nice and straight and 90 degrees, of course, so make sure to use something that's 90 degrees to help with that. Doesn't matter really which way round this goes, with this being on the left or on the right. We're going to cut this out in a minute, put the servo there, and then run the wire back to the elevator. But it doesn't really matter which way round it goes. If you want to make this a bit stronger, you can put a fillet of glue along the sides by running the glue along here. Now if you want a really good glue joint, then you could probably remove a bit of material on here, and then you've got wood to wood when you put this down. So we're just going to put some glue on here, and then just up against this part here, so that you get a nice join, and maybe a little bit on these tabs. Right, I'm going to pop this in. Now we can just put a bit of pressure on there. Make sure that the tabs have lined up, and you can just literally hold it like that until it's dry. Now we can do the same with the wing. So this just goes up along here, and you can use the ribs to align it. So you just push this up against the back, and then have it make sure it's nice and straight. Put some glue down. Now you want quite a lot of glue on this bit because obviously we were experimenting with using elastic bands like on the Cub to attach this, but we decided that seeing as though you have your servo up here, which is what I'm going to show you next, that it was a bit of a faff getting elastic bands over this. So yeah, just using plenty of glue, making sure there's a really strong bond is absolutely fine. And obviously if you want to go ahead and reinforce this further, then you can, but yeah, we've not had any problems in testing with the wing coming away. The only issue we did have was when the wing folded, which is on the testing and development video, if you've seen that. But we have fixed that with a stronger spar that's doubled up with quite a hard wood, which is harder than the wood that we were using back then. And there is also, if you've noticed earlier, there are holes in each one of the ribs, so you can put a carbon rod in there if you want to. But we have tested this design with a new spar, and it has fixed the problem with the wings folding. So as long as you don't load this up with a huge 6-cell battery or something underneath and go at 100 miles an hour, literally, then you should be okay. Now I'm going to put a bead of glue along here as well, just to sort of further reinforce the wing. On this side as well. So that wing is now firmly bonded to the fuselage. We've got the tail installed, and now we just need to hook up the control surfaces. Right, now you're going to need your control horns included in the kit. You're going to need your 2 servos that are either in the power pack that you bought along with this plane, or your own provided 9-gram servos. You also might need some control linkages, but you don't have to use these. These are included in the power pack kit. Yeah, you don't have to use these if you're not using the power pack and you just have bits of wire. And talking of wire, you're going to need your, I think this is 18 gauge wire for the control rods. The first thing we're going to do to the airframe to get it ready for the final electronics is to cut the relief holes for the 2 servos, which is one here and one here. There's one. That's the first one done, and that's the servo that will control the elevator, and this one will be for the aileron servos. So what I've done now is just install the servos, the one with the short arm on the back for the elevator, and the one with the dual arm with the longer arms at the front on the main wing. So I've just passed all of the leads through the fuselage towards the rear. You can use wood screws, which is probably preferable, as then you can remove them from your airframe quite easily, which means that you can always swap them from different airframe to airframe if you want to use the same power electronics for different planes. So you can just get one power pack and then use it on several different aeroplanes. Right, now we're going to install the control horns. So you'll have 4 included in the kit, but you only need 3. So you get 1 extra spare one, which is always nice to have spare parts. I mean, it's not like you're going to mess up with doing this really, but yeah. So you're just going to cut away the sort of covering material in the notches here, and then you can push down the control horn into the notch. And then you can do exactly the same thing on the tail here. And the elevator control horn just goes in like that. Exactly the same. Now I've realised I've done something a bit wrong here, which is really easy to fix. I've got the wooden control horn on this side, but I have the control arm on the servo over here facing the wrong side. So all I'm going to do is unscrew the control arm from the servo, turn it around and put it on this side. Now this doesn't mean it's going to go the wrong way or anything. We can always reverse the direction of the servo on the transmitter if it is. So yeah, now we can permanently fix the control horns in place with a dab of glue here and there. Okay, and now we're going to make the actual push rods themselves. You need to first of all measure how far you want the push rod to go, and then we're going to put a Z-bend on one of the ends of the wire. So I'm going to sort of make this a bit longer than the length it needs to be. I'm going to use a pair of pliers just to break it in half. Now we're going to make the Z-bend, and it's actually really easy to do. So just grab your pliers, grab the piece of wire, and then bend a small section at 90 degrees. So you've got a 90-degree bend there. Now instead of grabbing it here, where you think you might want to get a bit more manipulation over the wire, you want to sort of grab it across the wire like that and bend at 90 degrees, so you've got this weird, not a Z bend, but a sort of 90 degree going that way, 90 degree going vertically there. And then we can bend it straight. So you want to grab this again and then bend it up this way. Like so. And now we pretty much have a Z bend. Now I've not done this one very well, because as you can see that's not exactly 90 degrees, but now we can just tweak it a little bit by grabbing it there. And then you can just use the table a little bit to squish that end flat and get it at a nice 90 degree. And there you go, you've got a Z bend. So we've got the plane, we've got the wire with the Z bend on, we've got the control arm here, and we're just going to push the wire through that control arm and then run the wire back to this wooden control horn. But if you have them, I would recommend using the linkages. This is because they're much better to set up the plane. I'm just going to use the middle hole as well, just to get a sort of medium setup in terms of the sensitivity of the controls. Now, before you power the plane up, when we've finished in a minute, I'd leave this nice and loose like this, so it's not gripping the wire. And that's so that when the servo powers on, if it's at a weird angle, it's not going to try and pull this one way or the other, and we can tighten it up in the neutral position and get the whole plane set up neutrally, which I'll show you later, so we'll go into that in a minute. Alright, that's all finished. Now we just need to put the receiver in, power the plane up, and set it up for the first flight. Just to explain something about the geometry of how these control linkages and everything work, I've put the control rods on these middle holes here, and I've put the linkages on the control horns on the middle hole of the control horns, and again that's to have a sort of medium sensitivity. Now if you wanted this to be really docile, you'd put the linkages on the topmost holes on the control horns. Now that of course goes for the tail as well. Okay, finally now we're going to do the final thing before flight, which is to set up the radio and the radio equipment inside the plane with the receiver. And we're also going to need the battery at this point, which is our standard recommended battery for this plane type. And you'll also need a piece of Velcro or something like that to attach the battery to the bottom of the plane. You can use other, like just elastic bands or something like that, but probably best to get yourself some Velcro. It's very handy for model planes. So straight away you'll see that we've got some leads poking out the back of this. And that is, of course, for the servos and the ESC wire for the motor. So what we're going to do is plug them into the receiver. Now before doing this, you should have set up the electronics beforehand to make sure that it all works. Do make sure to check out that video before starting on your new project, your aeroplane build. Hold down the bind button on top of this receiver whilst plugging in the battery. Okay, so now we've got the battery plugged in and the receiver in its bind mode. You'll see the flashing light on the top there. Now top tip, I'm going to take this over the other side of the room because Spectrum transmitters don't like being right next to the receivers in the binding phase. So I'm going to hold down the bind button, power on the transmitter, and whilst I'm over the other side of the room, just to give it the best chance of binding first time. And now if you unplug the battery, just, if you want to, and then plug it back in again, you won't have to rebind it every time, it will be bound up to the same transmitter. So those beeps indicate that the ESC is now all calibrated and that the motor and everything is ready to go. Now this is where you can alter the setup of your controls and everything, both manually by adjusting the control horns and the control linkages, but also on the radio if you have an advanced transmitter that you can program to alter sensitivity of things and that kind of stuff. So you should see that the aileron servo works to an extent, even though it's obviously you've not hooked those up properly yet. The motor works. If it spins the wrong way, you need to switch out the bullet connectors as mentioned before and as mentioned in the setup electronics video. And the elevator should be working as well, or at least the servo. Now this control arm is slightly crooked. Now obviously we want it to be straight so that you get the equal amount of give and take on both of the ailerons. So what we're going to just do is use a screwdriver and reposition it. And now we can tighten up the control linkages. You want to just make sure that they're nice and flat against the profile of the wing. The interesting thing is, on this plane you can actually give yourself more lift by angling them down slightly, so that's a nice little thing. If you want to fly a bit slower, then you can do that. Cool. And now you should see that everything's moving properly. Turning the plane over, we can now find a home for the receiver. You can put it wherever you want really, but for now I'm just going to sort of put it inside there, and then we need to of course stick the Velcro on the underside of the plane. And the great thing about this design is that you can of course slide the battery forwards and backwards as much as you want to get the right centre of gravity. And that's pretty much the whole plane. Now we can put the propeller on. Don't do this until you're literally about to go and fly, and be very careful around the plane whilst it's installed because they are very dangerous, you can lose a finger. So now to check the motor is going the right way for sure. Yep, so it's going the right direction to provide positive thrust going that way, not that way. If the controls are going the wrong way, you can change them in the transmitter. There's information on how to do that in the manual. So now the only thing left to do is to go and give it a test flight.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Good.
Okay, that's about it for today. Make sure to check out the demo flight video for the Baron. It should be coming out in a week or two, depending on whether we can fly or not. But yes, that will show you all of the step-by-step setup pre-flight, so that you can make sure that you have a successful flight if this is one of your first aeroplanes. Obviously, if you know what you're doing, then go ahead, fly it. And have a lot of fun. But yes, if you're a beginner, it's probably best if you watch that video. Just to let you know, just as a quick tip, for all of our Balsa Basics planes, you can balance the aeroplane over the main spar. Make sure you have your battery installed. I haven't at the moment, as you can see. But yeah, you should be able to just put your fingers on the spar like this, and if it is level and neutral, then you know that you've got a good balance on the aeroplane. Centre of gravity is really key, so before you go and fly, just watch a few videos on that subject, make sure that you know that you've got a balanced aeroplane, and you should have a lot more success than you would have if you don't. Of course, we have got lots of beginner information on our website and also on this YouTube channel, so yep, subscribe if you want to get some more videos like this in your inbox in the near future. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and we will see you on the very next one. Cheers!